Hey guys, what's going on? It's me, Jay. First of all, for all the Star Wars fans on the channel, happy May the Fourth. May the Fourth be with you. But this is May extravaganza for professional wrestling fans. Um, the it's 1990. It's Slamboree 1995. Now, typically, I had to choose a Slamboree event because the month of May, no, typically in the old school WWE. Uh, Back in the 90s, they didn't have a May pay per view. In fact, WCW didn't even have a May pay per view until 1995, until 1993. And then they decided to call it Slamboree, the Legends Reunion. Basically, WCW had their own Hall of Fame, and they decided to make the event around all these legends. Lou Thez, Vern Gagne, Dory Funk Sr., Dusty Rhodes, and annually for 2 years after this, this became the event where the Hall of Famers would be inducted. Gordon Soley would induct the Hall of Famers of the wrestling business, and this was cool for me because I didn't know these guys. You know what I mean? They wrestled before my time, especially someone's like Hardboiled Haggerty and Penny Banner and well, Wahoo McDaniel I knew. Uh, I didn't know this person, the controversial person that's going to be inducted in the 1995 class, and he was the father of my favorite wrestler, and that's Angelo Poffo. And we'll get into why he was controversial and why his induction to the WCW Hall of Fame caused Gordon Soley to leave the company. So this event took place on May the 21st, 1995, from the Bayfront Arena in St. Petersburg, uh, Florida. Eric Bischoff is on commentary because Tony Schiavone chose to get neck surgery. Now let's talk about the inductees to the WCW Hall of Fame. Wahoo McDaniel, Angelo Poffo, Terry Funk, Antonio Inoki, Dusty Rhodes, Gordon Soley, and Big John Studd were all inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame. The WCW Hall of Fame, which I guess is now the WWE Hall of Fame. But yes, so this event has a pre-show. WCW back in these days had a television show that came on Sundays called The Main Event. And this would usually, on pay-per-view Sundays, this would usually serve as a pre-show to the pay-per-view. I was able to watch this pay-per-view because at this time, 1995, I had legal cable, like I said, and I watched every single pay-per-view. So let's get into it. The pre-show had four matches. The Blue Bloods, Lord Steven Regal and Earl Robert Eaton, Bobby Eaton. They attacked the Nasty Boys, Jerry Sags and Brian Knobs, in the entryway to a match against the Especialistas, against Luchadors. During the next two matches, Steve Austin defeated Eddie Jackie and Craig Pitbull Pittman defeated Mark Starr. So as you can see, Steve Austin is on his way out. He will soon be gone from the company, and by the year's end, he will be in. First, he will make a one pit stop in ECW, finding his voice once again as the superstar Steve Austin, mocking his former employers. But basically, he won't show up again in mainstream wrestling until November of this same year, when he appears as Ted DiBiase's new $1 million champion on the Brother Love Show. And Sergeant Craig Poo Pittman is this guy that they're really pushing, right? We'll see him in upcoming events in 1995, especially Full Brawl. Okay, right now the United States Championship is being held up for grabs because the previous champion was stripped of it, and it is a tournament match. Ming defeats Brian Pillman. Following the match, Road Warrior Hawk confronts Ming, and then they sign Ming up for a match against Road Warrior Hawk later on in the night. Basically, during this time, Mike Hegstrand, Road Warrior Hawk, was trying to make it on his own. He left the World Wrestling Federation in 1992. He went to Japan for a little while. Animal and him basically broke up. He went to Japan for a little while. By December of '93, he's back in WCW. He teamed with Sting to take on the Nasty Boys at that year's Starrcade. And he moves in and out of WCW for the next 2 years. As we see here, he's here feuding with Colonel Rob Parker's Chargers, especially Ming, but also Kurosawa was another wrestler who he also feuded with that was managed by Colonel Rob Parker. The first match of the pay-per-view, despite being attacked early on the pre-show, the Nasty Boys won the tag team championships by defeating Harlem Heat. Sag started the match because Knobs was injured. Knobs later joined his partner, and they were successful. Now, this next match, Kevin Sullivan defeating the man with no name. Who is Kevin? Well, we know who Kevin Sullivan is, but who is the man with no name? The man with no name is the former butcher, the former barber, Brutus Beefcake, aka Ed Leslie. This was when he was going through a transition. As we know, in October of 1994, at the end of Halloween Havoc, Hulk Hogan finally got a hold of the masked man who was attacking him since Clash of the Champions. Just a little refresher course. Clash of the Champions, August of 1994, the same day when O.J. Simpson allegedly killed his family. Right? Hulk Hogan was scheduled to have a match with Ric Flair, the rematch from their Bash at the Beach encounter back in July. And Hulk Hogan's coming out for the interview, and a masked man attacks him. Gene Okerlund yells, "This is horrific!" And I was a kid back then. I'm sitting there watching with my stepdad, and I'm like, "Why is Mean Gene?" I thought he said terrific. I didn't know what the word horrific meant. I'm like, "Why is Mean Gene saying that Hulk Hogan getting hit by this masked man is terrific?" But anyway, we don't think Hogan's going to make the match. Somehow he makes the match and he beats Ric Flair. I think him and Ric Flair should have traded victories, and then the rubber match could have been an Halloween Havoc, because that ended up being Ric Flair's retirement match anyway at Halloween Havoc 94. But at the end of it, Hogan finally gets a hold of this masked man, and he unmasks him, and it's Brother Brutai, a.k.a. Brutus Beefcake. And Beefcake then goes on to main event Starrcade with him. They form a new faction, Kevin Sullivan, John Tenta, who's just come in from WWE, and Brutus Beefcake. They're the three faces of fear. And they're basically feuding with Hulk Hogan, and this leads to a match, Hulk Hogan versus The Butcher at Starrcade 1994. Probably the worst Starrcade ever. John Tenta that night takes on Sting, and Kevin Sullivan takes on Mr. T. Yes, Mr. T in 1994. He just come back to the company. He was accompanying Hogan in his match against Ric Flair in the cage in October. Right? But now the faces of fear have disintegrated. There are no more. The three faces of fear. And Kevin Sullivan turned on the former Butcher. Now the Butcher has no name, right? Well, Kevin Sullivan wins this match, and by the end of the match, there is a mysterious figure calling out to him, "Sullivan, my son, Sullivan, my son, Sullivan, my son, and and the mysterious figure is King Curtis Iokea, a legendary heel, most legendary in the Pacific Islands, in the Hawaiian territory, probably one of the most legendary Hawaiian wrestlers of all time. Originally, Kamala's first run in the 80s, he was his manager. So they put him with Kevin Sullivan, and he's the master, and he bestows upon Kevin Sullivan the title of the Taskmaster. And here is the birth after this match of the Dungeon of Doom. By August, we'll be seeing Hulk Hogan go into the Dungeon of Doom and get attacked by, oddly enough, Ed Leslie. Ed Leslie and Kevin Sullivan have a reconciliation, and Ed Leslie comes back as the Zodiac. So he won't be the man with no name for very long. He becomes a member of the Dungeon of Doom. So this is the beginning of the Dungeon of Doom. This match. Okay, now we get on this pay-per-view is very unique. Yes, David, Mr. T said Petita Fool. Pay-per-view was very unique because like the two previous years, we had legends matches. We have matches with wrestlers that are no longer active. I wish WWE did something like this nowadays, right? These legend matches. Wahoo McDaniel and Dick Murdoch were shown in black and white during the pay-per-view telecast. And Gordon Soley and Bobby Heenan did commentary to further the old school aspect. The Great Muta then the next match is the Great Muta retaining the IWGP Championship against Paul Orndorff and Arn Anderson. Orndorff is about to undergo a drastic gimmick change. He's about to have this psychic follow him around, and he's getting a new theme song. But pretty soon, Paul Orndorff will be retiring. But the Great Muta here retaining the New Japan, the IWGP Heavyweight Championship, continuing the relationship that WCW had a lot with New Japan Pro Wrestling. Arn Anderson, he has a match against Alex Wright. Remember Alex Wright? Steve Wright's son, second generation wrestler. Europe. Steve Wright is British, but he wrestled a lot in Otto Vaughn's territory in Germany. And Alex grew up in Germany and spoke the German language. So when they first brought him in the early part of 1995, he was Das Wunderkind, the Wonder Kid in German. He would dance like this, right? His stupid dance, right? And people kind of liked him, and he had an undefeated streak. He had a good match the pay-per-view before this with Brian Pillman at the Great American Bash. But this match sucked. But Arn was, still television champion. So then Sting. We get Sting versus Big Bubba Rogers. Now, what is this? Who's Big Bubba Rogers? He's Ray Traylor. When Ray Traylor, aka the Big Boss Man, when Ray Traylor made the jump from the WWF to WCW in late 1993, Vince was starting to go through his steroid trial, and Ray Traylor just didn't want to be associated with that kind of stuff. So he asked for his release, and he wrestled for a little bit in Smoky Mountain Wrestling for Jim Cornette, who of course was his former manager in real life. And then after that, in December of 1993, he showed up on WCW Saturday Night as the Boss. And the problem with that gimmick was the Boss is a little bit too close to the Big Boss Man. The previous gimmick he had betrayed in the WWF, and they used it for a while, for a couple months. He had his first match against Rick Rude. It was a international championship match, aka an NWA title match at Starrcade '93. He was the referee for Flair and Vader 2 in the cage at Super Bowl 4. And then he had to feud with Vader, and they had to strip him of that gimmick because storyline wise, kayfabe wise, he beat the shit out of Vader. And WCW Commissioner Nick Bockwinkel said, "You can, the nightstick is a weapon. You can't use the nightstick. You can no longer be the boss." And then the Guardian Angels, an international crime fighting organization headed by Curtis Sweela, that was started in 1979 to combat gang violence in New York City, presented Ray Traylor with the opportunity to, it has since expanded all around the world, but they presented Ray Traylor with the opportunity to be a wrestling guardian angel. And that's what he was for the remainder of 1995 into 1990, the remainder of 1994 into 1995. But then, fuck it, he decided to, after losing a WCW title opportunity a U.S. title opportunity in a triple threat match between himself, Hacksaw Jim Duggan, and Sting at Full Brawl, he decides to turn on Sting and goes back to his old WCW gimmick of Big Bubba Rogers that he was as the manager of, or the bodyguard of, the Midnight Express. Now, no more Midnight Express, but he still is Bubba Rogers here. And Sting defeats him via submission. Now we get into the main event of the evening. The main event is Hulk Hogan teaming with Macho Man Randy Savage to take on Vader and Flair. Of course, WCW Uncensored, a wild-ass pay-per-view, the first ever in WCW history. And at the end of this, Ric Flair, despite retiring from professional wrestling in October, managed to get back into the arena uncensored, where he was banned by dressing up as a woman and attacking Randy Savage, and then later attacking Hulk Hogan. Ric Flair dressed as a woman. So Hulk Hogan is in a leather strap match with Vader. Because that was the gimmick to Uncensored. Every match had a stipulation. So Vader is in the leather strap match against Hogan. Hogan wins, but not by dragging Vader to all corners. He dragged Ric Flair to all corners. So Ric Flair, the guy that interfered, is the guy that actually lost the match in Uncensored for Vader. Didn't make sense, but no, that's WCW in a nutshell in 1995. So now Ric Flair and Vader are allies, both trying to destroy Hogan and Savage, of course, and Hogan are allies. They've been allies since Savage came to WCW at the end of Starrcade. Savage showed up WCW Saturday night, said he was going to either shake Hulk Hogan's hand or slap him in the face. At the end of his match with the Butcher, he shaked his hand, and together they beat up the Three Faces of Fear. They've been feuding with both the Three Faces of Fear and now Vader and Flair. And they've been best of buds, since Savage arrived in WCW. But this match, Savage comes out with his father, Angelo Poffo, one of the inductees into the WCW Hall of Fame. Now, the match is won by the good guys, by Hogan and Savage, but they, at the end, Flair and Vader beat up Angelo Poffo, putting him in a figure four leg lock. And a mysterious man is standing by the entrance. A mysterious big man. Later we will find out in 1995 who this big guy is. It's Paul White. It's the Giant. He was also seen during Renegade's match against Arn Anderson the following month at the Great American Bash when Renegade defeats Arn Anderson for the television championship. Now, who is the Renegade? The Renegade actually comes out and helps Angelo Poffo and helps Macho Man and Hulk Hogan. But who is he? He's basically a Warrior ripoff. Uncensored, another thing that was building up uncensored, besides the idea that it was an unsanctioned event by WCW, that it was everything goes, right? You were going to see blood, you were going to see guts, right? This was 2 years after ECW was founded. So 3 years after ECW was founded. So ECW is kind of already, people are used to it, and it's like uncensored. They tried to make like a tame version of ECW, saying it was going to be something like that. It was nothing like that, right? But the other tagline that was getting a lot of people hooked in to Uncensored 1995 was that they were going to have an ultimate surprise. The ultimate surprise. So we see Hulk Hogan there, we see the Macho Man there. So we're like, okay, the ultimate surprise. It has to be the Ultimate Warrior, right? He's not in the WWF, so he's gonna join Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage to help them against Ric Flair, Arn Anderson, and Vader, right? No, it's not. Jimmy Hart comes out with an imitation. Richard Wilson, Rick Wilson, an imitation Ultimate Warrior called the Renegade. I mean, this guy, if you saw this guy, man, it was the biggest letdown ever if you were a kid, because I was an Ultimate Warrior fan. I wanted to see the Ultimate Warrior in some capacity in professional wrestling at the time. And when I saw this guy, I was just like, what the fuck? The Renegade. you, you, but hey, like I said, he comes out to help the good guys, helps save Randy Savage's father from getting the beatdown. Now, the introduction of Randy Savage's dad caused a lot of controversy with regards to the Hall of Fame. Gordon Soley, who had been with the company back when it was Georgia Championship Wrestling all the way in the 50s. You know what I mean? Like before it was a national promotion. He'd been with it through all the eras. Jim Crockett Promotions era, the beginning of WCW. When I came in watching WCW, he was hosting WCW Pro, right? He was a legendary announcer, the dean of wrestling, especially in the Florida area, the Georgia area. He was very well known. He was the reason why him not being on the show was the reason why Southern fans rejected Vince McMahon in 1984 in Black Saturday. That was one of the main reasons. So Gordon Soley was a dean of wrestling, the wrestling historian, the wrestling brilliant mind. He knew about the business, been in the business for years, right? Highly respected, even to this day, other than Jim Ross. People often say to Gordon Sola, Jim Ross and Lance Russell, people often say that these are the three best announcers in professional wrestling history, and particularly in territories and companies outside of the WWF, because Gordon never worked for the WWF, although they did send emissaries to his funeral when he passed away, and later he was inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame. But he never worked there. So they had their own people, you know what I mean? They had in-house Gorilla Monsoon, Lord Alfred Hayes, Vince himself, even Pat Patterson, Bruno, you know, guys that meant something in that territory. But in the NWA territories, Gordon was the be-all, end-all. And the problem was, controversy arose because Gordon Solie did not feel that Randy Savage's father. I'm ready for the Knicks, yeah, David, I am. uh, that Randy Savage's dad deserved to be in the WCW Hall of Fame, partly because he ran an outlaw promotion. He ran a promotion for years and years that was operating outside of the National Wrestling Alliance, basically breaking this agreement, and that was offensive to loyal NWA members like Gordon Solie. Hmm. So this controversy, Gordon Solie accepted his nomination into the WCW Hall of Fame, but this controversy caused Gordon to end his relationship with WCW, leaving behind decades upon decades of history. Because he was like, what did Angelo Poffo ever achieve in the wrestling business of note other than being the Macho Man's father? And of course, Macho Man, being the top guy in WCW at this time, was going to get his father, maneuvered in. But they felt like it. Gordon Solie felt like it should be something of merit. You know, Savage tried to do this. Apparently, this was the root of Savage's disagreement with the WWF way back in 1986. There was a Legends Battle Royal in I think it was the Continental Airlines Arena. It was like I think in New Jersey, right? The Continental Airlines Arena, and like Lou Thez was there, all the stars from Angelo's era, and they said that Angelo would be allowed to be in it, and he wasn't. You know, because again, he didn't have that kind of respect in the business, and Savage lost it. So WCW didn't make that same mistake. They decided to put Poffo in, despite the controversy, and then of course, Gordon Solie to leave the company. Also, this was the end of the relationship of one of the top announcers in early WCW history, Gary Michael Capetta. I love Gary Michael. He started off in the WWE in the 70s, but I know him from WCW. So Gary Michael Capetta was my favorite um, uh, WCW announcer because when I started watching WCW in September of 1993, I he was the voice I associated with WCW, like I associated the Fink with the WWF. So his voice. Coming down the aisle, weighing 235 pounds, is Sting from Venice Beach, California. This is Sting. He was basically WCW's announcer in any of the matches that weren't main events. They would use Michael Buffer for the main events, but any match that wasn't main events, he was the announcer. Dave Pinzer went on to replace him. But this is his last WCW event, so it's basically a new era for WCW. No more Gordon Solie. Pretty soon, no more Stunning Steve. If you started watching WCW in the late 80s and early 90s, the things you fell in love with about WCW were drastically changing because the Hogan era in WCW is in full effect. They are a couple of months away from Nitro. This is May. They'll be starting Nitro in September. Overall, this pay-per-view is lackluster. It only leads to further storylines, particularly that of Randy Savage and Ric Flair. This is where their rivalry really begins because before this, Randy Savage is feuding with Avalanche. He's feuding with Three Faces of Fear, right? But right here, because Flair attacked his father, they're going into a program, and they have tremendous chemistry. Randy Savage and Ric Flair. They have tremendous chemistry from their time in WWF. So this will carry over from WrestleMania 8. This will carry over into WCW, and this will become the feud that initially, before the NWO, actually brought the numbers up for WCW, the ticket sales, because this feud becomes so intense. Later, they'll have their first match at the Great American Bash the following month, but they'll have a lumberjack match at Bash at the Beach, so with lifeguards outside, right? And their rivalry will go to Starcade, where Flair will defeat Savage. Uh, for the WCW Championship, and then Savage will defeat Flair, and then Flair will defeat him again at Super Bowl VI. This will go all the way, like I said, into the early part of 1996. And it's not till the NWO gets there that finally Flair and Savage find themselves on the same side. But like I said, this was an entertaining feud because they have tremendous chemistry. As far as Hogan and Vader feud is coming to an end pretty soon. Uh, the in 2 months they'll have the blowout in July. Uh, on the beach, Hogan and Vader in a cage. Dennis Rodman, who was on the San Antonio Spurs at that time, was in Hogan's corner. That was the first time Rodman appeared in a wrestling event. Right, wouldn't be the last beside Hulk Hogan. But Hogan defeats Vader, and that's the end of their feud. They've been feuding since the beginning of '95, since Vader won the U.S. Championship and confronted from Vader won the U.S. Championship from Hacksaw Jim Duggan and confronted um, Hogan, after his win against the Butcher, and they led into their Super Bowl V match, and then their leather strap match, and Vader's alliance with Flair, and eventually with Arn Anderson, who becomes the second masked man attacking Hulk Hogan, and Arn's discovered. Right, so they're moving on up to the main event. He'll be with Flair, and that will lead to the reunion, the Horseman reunion at Halloween Havoc. So there's a lot of things are brewing in WCW because they're basically jobbing Vader out. Vader in 1995 was nowhere near what Vader was in 1993. I mean, go back and look 2 years before this, the initial Slamboree. You had the main event was Vader versus the British Bulldog. And Vader was a beast back then. All of 93, most of 94, but especially 93. 93 in WCW was Vader's year. He was breaking backs. He had the Lost in Cleveland storyline with him and Cactus Jack. He had the White Castle affair with Sting at Super Raw. And the great match with Ric Flair at Starcade. Great matches with the Bulldog, great matches with the Natural Dustin Rhodes. But Hogan comes in, he didn't even want to initially work with Vader. His conditions of coming in, there could be no Bill Watts. He didn't want to work for Bill Watts. He didn't want to work with Rick Rude or with Vader. So you don't want to work with the boss. Good, we're firing him anyway. You don't want to work with Vader. Okay, so we'll move him down the card. Eventually, he gets to work with him, but he squashes him. Right? You don't want to work with Vader. You don't want to work with Rick Rude. Okay, they'll push Rick Rude down the card, and basically Rude gets injured anyway. That's the thing about this. Rude got injured anyway at the last Slamboree. He was supposed to wrestle Vader, but he gets injured in the matches with Sting in Japan, so he's out in '94. And by '95, he's in ECW. So Hogan's basically having his way. Anybody who he doesn't want to work with, including the stars of WCW, the Ron Simmonses, the Steve Austins, the Cactus Jacks, the Vaders, they're all out. Vader will be gone soon too. And Hogan's just moving his guys in. Hacksaw Jim Duggan, initially the Honky Tonk Man, Brutus the Barber Beefcake, all these ex-Hogan guys, coming into WCW. But this wouldn't be the last Slamboree that they would do, but this would be the last Night of Legends Slamboree that they did. After this, they don't do the Night of Legends thing. The following year, they do Battle Bowl. They bring back Battle Bowl. But this was WCW's attempt to create a Hall of Fame of their own. They figured, hey, WWE has a Hall of Fame, and WWE had their tradition. WCW would induct their celebrities and their legends in May, and WWE would usually induct them in June. From 1993 onward, Andre was inducted right after he passed away. But the other celebrities, the 94 class, the 95 class, and the 96 class, well, no, the 94 class and the 95 class were inducted around King of the Ring time. 96 class was inducted around like Survivor Series in November. But after that, WWE stops it too. You know what I mean? They stopped doing it until 2004. You know what I mean? So enough for the legends. But it was a cool concept anyway. And Slamboree, this Slamboree was pretty much a throwaway pay-per-view because again, 95 was so weird for both companies. You know what I mean? Like 95 in professional wrestling should be a case study for the two major companies anyway, not for ECW because ECW was on fire at this time. You know, Raven had just come over. He was having his feud with Tommy Dreamer, right? Uh, Mick Foley would turn heel and he would have a feud with Tommy Dreamer, right? As in 1995, that's when he did the Kane Dewey promo. The Sandman was still doing his thing. Him and Raven would soon get into it, and their feud would take up almost the entirety of '96. So ECW is doing big things, but when it comes to the WWF and WCW, they're not doing big things. They're doing anything but big things. WCW is about to do big things, but um, even they're not doing big things. And the WWF is getting ready to. Speaking of ECW, Vince McMahon is getting ready to be exposed to ECW the month prior. David mentions oftentimes that the pay-per-view that was opposed to Slamboree, which is the first in your house, which was the May offering of the WWF. It was his favorite pay-per-view because I think it was his birthday or whatever, you know. And that's Sid versus Diesel for the WWF Championship. But this was WCW's counter. But like I said, the next month, Vince McMahon is about to be introduced to ECW because he has the King of the Ring in Philadelphia. And the King of the Ring tournament is so shitty that the final, Mabel versus Savio Vega, that the entire crowd boos Mabel out of the building and chants ECW, ECW. And Vince McMahon's like, what's that? What's ECW? And somebody clues him in after the pay-per-view is over that ECW is this local promotion in Philadelphia ran by the former manager Paulie Dangerously from WCW, and they're soon to begin their relationship that will come to define them. So things are definitely changing in the mainstream of professional wrestling in 1995, but you know, this is a pretty mediocre pay-per-view. There isn't much of this that I would say is good. You know, I chose to review it because it's one that sticks out to me because it's an end of an era for WCW, letting go of these traditionally things that, because like there were things and there were superstars and there were flavors that defined WCW and there were flavors that defined the WWF. And it becomes obvious in this pay-per-view that the Hogan era is in full swing. Hogan is basically Kevin Sullivan has taken the book. He is booking now for WCW, and he basically that's why he creates the Dungeon of Doom. He basically wants to hook Hogan up with people that he is comfortable working with, people that he has worked with before in the WWF, like Ed Leslie, his best friend, uh, Brutus Beefcake, like John Tenta, like Kamala, like Ming, Haku, basically everybody that is in the Dungeon of Doom, all ex WWF guys, the typical monsters that Hogan is used to working with. Uh, Kevin Sullivan's bright idea was let's put them all in a stable together and call them the Dungeon of Doom because Hogan didn't trust other people. He didn't want to do anything for Vader. That's why the feud with Vader never went anywhere. And how many times can you wrestle Ric Flair? And the top heels in the company before Hogan got there was Steve Austin, Rick Rude, and Vader. And you don't want to work with any of them. You feel like Steve Austin is beneath you. You feel like Vader is too dangerous, and you feel like Rude is, I don't know. I think Hogan and Rude had some problems, back when they were in the WWF together, but Hogan just didn't want to work with Rude. So, like, okay, you don't want to work with those guys, bringing all the WWF heels from the 80s and 90s that you worked with, like Earthquake, Kamala, and all those guys, and we'll have you work with them. Problem is, people are tired of that. Like we saw that already in the WWF, and it was much better produced by the WWF. We don't want to see that again. You know what I mean? But that's what they stacked this Dungeon of Doom shit up with. And like, it's the most hokiest shit that you'll ever see. But this is the beginning of it. But basically, Hulk Hogan is having his way with the company. He's basically booking the company. Kevin Sullivan is the booker in name only because Hogan is influencing him. Later on, Kevin Sullivan will become more brazen and he would suggest things to Hogan, like Hogan turning heel. You know what I mean? But in the beginning, from May of 1995 to March of 1996, Hogan was basically calling the shots. He was doing what he wanted to do, including later on turning Ed Leslie a babyface again and giving him the even crazier name than the man with no name, the Booty Man. The Booty Man. And yes, Mr. T in 1994 was the biggest waste ever. I don't know why they thought anybody would remember him. You know what I mean? By 1994, nobody was talking about Rocky 3. Nobody was talking about the A-Team. Nobody was talking about WrestleMania 1. Kids like me, maybe they knew about WrestleMania 1. Maybe they knew about Rocky 3. Maybe they knew about the A-Team. But he wasn't in the current zeitgeist. I don't know how they thought him being associated with Hulk Hogan was anything of importance. But they did, and they brought him back for a match, and he got blown up by Kevin Sullivan during the match. But yeah, that's Slamboree 1995, guys. Man, 1995 is, like I said, a crazy year, really fun year of wrestling, but a really lame duck year for WCW and the WWF, man.